All right. Imagine you and your friend were to commit a crime. You guys both get caught and both going to take time in prison. You are sentenced to a private company owned by the prison, and you are sentenced for 40 years, where the guards are not trained well, and you are held there longer for the company to make more money. Your friend, on the other hand, is only sentenced to 20 years to a public prison owned by the government, where he is out in 20 years and the guards are trained to standard. Is that fair for you and your friend? Private prisons in America should be abolished, and the point of this speech is to show the public why. I will be addressing the problem with private prisons, the solution of abolishing private prisons, and what the prison system will look like without private prisons. This leads me to my first point. What is a private prison and what's wrong with them? I will be addressing the problem with private prisons, the solution of abolishing private prisons, and what the prison system will look like without private prisons. According to the criminal justice programs, what they have to say about private prisons is a lot. There are stark differences between public and private prisons, they said. When it comes to overall comparisons, privately run prisons are often less likely to report data on inmate population, staffing, and where the budget was spent. The main difference between the two types of prisons come down to money. Each for-profit facility or institution houses are people who violated the law. They are run by private third-party companies rather than the state government, who runs a traditional public prison. Private prisons receive their funding from the government and contracts, as many as these contracts are based by the total of number of inmates at the average length of time served. So each person that is in this prison, private prison owned by a company, for how long they stay and how many they make money. The article continues by saying, this means that more inmates these prisons can hold with longer sentences, the more money they earn. The private companies of today that run prison facilities are federal government housed at 8% of the US prison population, which is rising even more today. So now we know that private prisons are all about the money and they want to keep inmates in as long as possible. There's also the opposition of this side says that the argument that the private prison system is good for America because other countries have strived for it. Examples of using private prisons well include private prisons in Australia, New Zealand, that have performance-based contracts with the government. The prisons earn bonuses for doing better than the government prisons at cutting recidivism. They get an even bigger bonus if they beat government reducing recidivism among indigenous populations. And prison companies are charged with what governments deem unacceptable events like riots, escapes, and unnatural death. So this side of the argument proves that they want private prisons, but I disagree because they treat people worse, their guards are untrained well, and they leave them in for as long as possible so they can make more money off the person. This leads me to my next point. The solution to private prisons in the criminal justice system is just to abolish private prisons. Throughout this paper, I addressed the problem with private prisons. This is the solution of abolishing private prisons, and I will talk about what the prison system will look like without private prisons. There's a company in business that is trying to abolish private prisons. AbolishPrivatePrison.org breaks it up into 4 sections: mass incarceration, government day, financial bias, and slavery. This group brings in the slavery and says that the United States has a dark history of exploiting the lives of disadvantaged groups, usually the people of color. For the profit and the powerful, the colonial slavery through coolie labor, black codes, Jim Crow laws, and the government has sanctioned this practice. Locking up people for profit is simply the latest incarceration of slavery. So what this means is that there's slavery bringing part of this problem, and there has to be a solution to just ending the slavery and incarceration rates at these private prisons. It should be abolished. Instead of sending inmates to private prisons, they should be sent to a publicly ran prison, not by what their color or their crime, but all of them should go to public prisons led by the government, which is fair for them and the government. This leads me to my third and final point, what the world would look like without private prisons. Private prisons are one of the worst things about an American criminal justice system. These private prisons are racist, ran poorly, and keep inmates in longer for their own use. I will be addressing the problem with private prisons, the solution of abolishing private prisons, and what the prison system will look like without them. In the article Going Private, are private prisons cost-saving options for states? This group did a study on if private prisons are supposed to save money for states, but it doesn't. It says, the quote says, "We find that private prisons provide no significant dynamic, adding economic clarification to previously inclusive case study evidence. This means that private prisons does not save money for the states, and they will do just fine without them." Throughout this speech, I have addressed the problem with private prisons, the solution with abolishing private prisons, and what the prison system will look like without private prisons. There's a lot of problems with the criminal justice system, and private prisons is one of the reasons why it is messed up. A quote from an article of the Human Rights Defense Center, he says about the mass incarceration in private prisons, he goes, "It is immoral, unethical, and unacceptable to incarcerate people for the purpose of generating profit," he said. "If people of America do not try and fight to abolish private prisons, it will never fix the corrupt American criminal justice system." Thank you.